In the grand tapestry of life, the twilight years are painted in hues of reflection, serenity, and a yearning for stability. For many, a home transcends the walls and roof that define it. It becomes the cradle of their memories, the guardian of their solitude, and the witness to their most vulnerable moments. As age weathers the body, a peaceful place to retreat transforms from luxury into necessity. But what does it mean to truly have a home? Mr. Peter and Mrs. Anna, a retired couple in their late 60s, epitomized simplicity. They had spent their lives building a modest yet comfortable house in the countryside, a sanctuary surrounded by a garden that reflected decades of shared labor. The roses Anna planted each spring bloomed alongside the towering oak tree Peter had nurtured from a sapling. The house was not just their dwelling, it was an extension of their lives, a silent observer of their struggles and triumphs. When their only son, David, approached them with a request, their hearts were torn. David, recently married and expecting his first child, struggled to afford a home in the city. "If we sell the house," David reasoned, "we can buy a small apartment together, and you won't have to worry about the upkeep anymore. Plus, you'll be close to your grandchild." Anna hesitated, but Peter, eager to support his son, agreed. "What's a house, Anna, compared to family?" he said. Their decision was made, but neither foresaw the profound ripple effect it would have on their lives. At first, life in the city seemed promising. The apartment, though smaller than their countryside home, offered modern conveniences and proximity to David's family. Anna filled her days caring for her newborn grandson, and Peter took solace in watching city life from their balcony. Yet, beneath the surface, a quiet tension began to brew. Their daughter-in-law, Maria, was polite but distant. The couple sensed her growing discomfort as their presence disrupted the rhythm of her home. "It's not her fault," Anna often reassured Peter, though her voice carried a hint of doubt. "We're guests here, after all." As months turned into years, the small apartment felt even smaller. Maria's passive remarks about expenses, David's increasing absence, and the couple's dwindling sense of autonomy weighed heavily on their spirits. One evening, Peter sat in the dimly lit living room, his hand resting on the arm of his chair. "Anna," he said softly, "do you ever miss our garden?" Her eyes glistened as she replied, "Every day." The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering, yet he also recognized the importance of a stable refuge. In letting go of their home, Peter and Anna hoped to find connection, but they learned that even the most well-meaning sacrifices can lead to unintended consequences. The Buddha's wisdom illuminates their struggle. Your home is not where you live, but where you find peace. Without a space to nurture their individuality and dignity, Peter and Anna began to feel adrift. Their sacrifice, though noble, came at the cost of their inner harmony. One cold winter night, as the couple huddled together in their bedroom, Peter made a decision. "We need to go back," he whispered. Anna looked at him, her eyes searching for clarity. "Back where?" "To a place we can call ours again." Their conversation sparked months of quiet planning. They realized that reclaiming their independence was not an act of defiance, but an affirmation of their worth. They sold a few heirlooms, borrowed a modest sum, and purchased a small cottage on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't the sprawling countryside home they had once owned, but it was theirs. Moving day was bittersweet. As Peter and Anna stood in their new home, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the scent of fresh paint, they felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The space was humble, just 2 rooms and a tiny garden, but it was enough. In the months that followed, they rediscovered the joy of simplicity. Peter planted a row of daisies, and Anna began baking bread again, filling the house with warmth and the aroma of home. Their relationship with David and Maria improved as well. Distance, they realized, allowed love to breathe. Visits were no longer tinged with resentment, but filled with genuine affection. The couple learned to cherish the moments they shared with their grandson, knowing they now had a space to retreat to when needed. Buddhism reminds us that true happiness lies in balance and discernment. Peter and Anna's story illustrates a profound truth. While generosity and sacrifice are virtues, they must be tempered with self-respect and mindfulness. A home is not just a structure, but a foundation for one's dignity and peace of mind. Without it, even the most loving hearts can feel lost. In the end, their journey was not about the loss or gain of a house, but about the reclamation of their inner peace. As they sat together on their small porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Peter turned to Anna and smiled. "We're home," he said. And for the first time in years, she felt it too. Health is often regarded as an afterthought until it begins to falter. In the quiet rhythm of old age, it emerges as the greatest treasure, one that wealth cannot replace and others cannot restore. Rooted deeply in Buddhist teachings, the body is seen as a vehicle for the mind, a sacred temple that allows us to experience the world and embark on the path to enlightenment. Caring for it is not merely a duty, but a profound act of mindfulness and gratitude. Mrs. Grace, a retired school librarian, had always lived modestly. She dedicated her prime years to nurturing others, her students, her 2 daughters, and her ailing husband. Her life was a patchwork of quiet sacrifices stitched together with love, but amidst her devotion, she neglected herself. In her 60s, Grace began to feel a dull ache in her abdomen, accompanied by fatigue that left her breathless even after simple chores. Brushing it off as a sign of aging, she avoided doctors, fearing the expense and inconvenience it might cause her children. "It's nothing serious," she often told herself, "just the wear and tear of life." Months passed, and the symptoms worsened. When she finally visited a clinic, she was diagnosed with early-stage stomach cancer. The news struck her like a thunderclap, not only for the fear it inspired, but for the realization of her negligence. She wept silently in the hospital waiting room, her thoughts oscillating between guilt and despair. "If only I had listened to my body sooner," she thought. Buddhist philosophy teaches the principle of impermanence, anicca, the understanding that all things, including the human body, are transient. While we cannot prevent the eventual decline of our physical form, we can treat it with the care and respect it deserves during its fleeting existence. The Buddha likened the body to a fragile clay vessel. It may crack over time, but if handled with mindfulness, it will fulfill its purpose. Grace began her treatment with trepidation, but also with a newfound resolve. She took the words of the Buddha to heart. To keep the body in good health is a duty. Otherwise, we shall not be able to keep our mind strong and clear. These teachings became her anchor, guiding her through the waves of uncertainty. During her recovery, Grace encountered others who were battling illness. At a local support group, she met Mr. Henry, a retired carpenter who had survived a heart attack. Henry shared how he had turned his health around by embracing mindfulness in his daily life. "Every morning," he explained, "I begin with 10 deep breaths. I thank my body for carrying me through another day, no matter how imperfectly it functions." Inspired, Grace adopted her own routine of mindfulness. She started walking in the park every morning, savoring the sound of birdsong and the scent of fresh grass. She learned to prepare simple, nourishing meals, finding joy in the process of cooking. Each meal became a reminder of life's abundance, no matter how humble the ingredients. Her daughters noticed the change. "You look different, Mom," her eldest remarked one evening. "Happier somehow." Grace smiled, realizing that her journey toward health was not just about survival, but about reclaiming her joy. Grace's story reminds us of the consequences of neglecting our health. In her earlier years, she believed self-care was selfish, a luxury she couldn't afford amidst her responsibilities. Yet her illness taught her that prioritizing her well-being was an act of love for herself and those who depended on her. This lesson was echoed by a Buddhist parable she once read. A man spent years carving a magnificent statue, neglecting the roof over his head. One day, the rains came and the statue crumbled. The man realized too late that caring for his shelter was essential to preserving his work. Grace's recovery was not without its challenges, but it was also a period of transformation. She reconnected with the vitality she had forgotten, and her gratitude deepened with each step forward. "Health is a garden," she often said to friends at her support group. "Neglect it, and weeds will take over, but tend to it with care, and it will bloom even after the harshest storms." In her 70s, Grace began volunteering at a community center, teaching yoga to fellow seniors. Her sessions were not about achieving perfection, but about honoring the body's capabilities, however limited they might be. "Your breath is your greatest ally," she told her class. "It's the bridge between your body and your spirit." Health is not a guarantee, but a privilege. Buddhist teachings encourage us to approach it with humility and mindfulness, recognizing its impermanence while nurturing it to the best of our ability. Grace's journey serves as a testament to this truth. She learned that self-care is not a selfish act, but a necessary foundation for living a meaningful life. As we grow older, our bodies may falter, but our spirit remains boundless. By treating our health as a sacred vessel, we honor the gift of life itself. As the Buddha said, "Without health, life is not life. It is only a state of languor and suffering." To care for our health is to cherish the moments we have, for they are fleeting and irreplaceable. In the quiet hours of the evening, Grace often sits by her window, sipping tea and watching the setting sun. Each sip is a reminder of her strength, each sunset a celebration of her resilience. She has found peace not in the absence of struggle, but in the grace of her journey. In the tapestry of life, financial independence is a thread often underestimated until its absence unravels the fabric of stability. For those entering the later stages of their journey, money is no longer a pursuit of luxury or ambition, but a quiet guardian of dignity. It is not greed to hold on to what one has earned, it is wisdom. Financial independence is the foundation upon which autonomy and peace are built, allowing the heart to rest and the mind to find clarity. Mr. Robert had spent his youth as a factory supervisor, a diligent and kind-hearted man who believed in the value of hard work. He and his wife, Evelyn, raised 3 children in a modest home, teaching them the virtues of integrity and generosity. Robert often spoke of sacrifice as a cornerstone of fatherhood, pouring every spare penny into his children's education and future. "What's the use of money if it doesn't help those we love?" he would say, his tone filled with conviction. When the children grew and moved to different cities, Robert found himself retired with Evelyn, living off a small pension. Their lives were simple but content, filled with routines that felt like quiet blessings. But life, ever unpredictable, began to test the strength of Robert's philosophy. One by one, his children turned to him for help. Mark, the eldest, needed funds to start a business. Sarah, his second, required assistance with a down payment for a house. James, the youngest, was struggling with medical bills for his new child. Robert, guided by his unwavering love for his family, gave without hesitation. "We'll manage," he told Evelyn, though she often stayed awake at night, silently running numbers in her head. Years passed, and Robert's small savings dwindled to nothing. The business Mark started failed. Sarah's new home brought unforeseen expenses. James's medical bills continued to pile up. Each time Robert asked for repayment, he was met with gentle apologies and excuses. "Things are tight right now, Dad," Mark would explain. "We'll pay you back when things improve." But improvement never came, and the debts became invisible, lost in the cracks of memory and shifting priorities. One evening, sitting by the dim light of their living room lamp, Robert turned to Evelyn, his voice heavy with regret. "Do you think I was wrong to give so much?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him with the compassion of decades shared. "You gave out of love," she replied. "But love must also consider the future. We cannot pour from an empty cup." Robert's financial struggles began to strain his relationship with his children. Without savings, he and Evelyn had to rely on them for even basic needs. This dependency created an undercurrent of resentment that neither side could articulate. Visits became less frequent, and conversations turned polite but distant. Robert, once a proud and independent man, felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what the lack of it symbolized, the loss of his ability to care for himself and the erosion of his dignity. The turning point came during a conversation with an old friend, Richard, who had lived a parallel life to Robert's, but with one crucial difference. He had always kept a portion of his earnings for himself. "It's not selfish, Robert," Richard explained over a cup of tea. "It's survival. You raised your children, gave them opportunities, and fulfilled your duty. But your life doesn't end when theirs begins. You have to take care of your own foundation, or you'll crumble." Robert reflected deeply on these words, drawing parallels to a teaching of the Buddha he had once read. Just as a bird flies with two wings, balance is essential in all things. He realized that his generosity had been noble, but lacked the balance necessary to sustain his well-being. He had treated his financial independence as something expendable, when it was, in fact, the cornerstone of his autonomy. Determined to reclaim his sense of security, Robert made changes. He and Evelyn downsized to a smaller home that required less upkeep and expense. They began setting aside a portion of their pension, no matter how modest, for emergencies and personal use. Robert also had frank, heartfelt conversations with his children, explaining the importance of their understanding his need for independence. "I love you all," he told them, "but I need to stand on my own 2 feet. That is how I can truly enjoy my years and cherish the time I have left with you." The shift was subtle but profound. Robert and Evelyn's lives became simpler, yet the simplicity brought a peace they hadn't felt in years. With fewer financial burdens, their interactions with their children softened. The unspoken tension lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of respect on both sides. Robert no longer felt like a burden, and his children began to see him not as someone who had given endlessly, but as someone who still had much to teach. Through his journey, Robert learned a valuable truth. Love and responsibility are not in opposition, but they must be tempered with wisdom. Financial independence is not about hoarding wealth. It is about preserving the ability to live with dignity and choice. As the Buddha taught, one should strive to understand what is truly needed, neither indulging in excess nor denying oneself what is essential. On quiet evenings, Robert would sit with Evelyn on their modest porch, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. "We've done all right," he'd say, his voice tinged with both pride and humility. Evelyn would nod, her hand resting on his, a silent agreement between two souls who had weathered life's storms together. Their world was smaller now, but within it, they had found something vast: peace. Relationships, like rivers, carve their paths slowly, shaping the landscapes of our lives. In the quiet years of old age, these bonds take on a new form. They are no longer defined by the intensity of passion or the ambitions of shared goals, but by the quiet companionship and the enduring strength of love and understanding. It is within the fabric of these relationships that we find our deepest joys and our most profound challenges. Margaret had always believed in the sanctity of family. A retired nurse, with a gentle smile, she had poured her life into raising her 3 children after the untimely death of her husband. Her days were filled with sacrifices, small and large, from working late shifts to skipping meals to ensure her children had enough. "Family is everything," she would often say, her voice steady with conviction. As her children grew older, they carved paths of their own, moving to distant cities to pursue careers and build their families. Margaret, now in her 70s, found her once busy home eerily quiet. The sounds of laughter that had echoed through its walls were replaced by the hum of silence. Her eldest son, Richard, visited occasionally, always in a rush, his conversations peppered with mentions of deadlines and meetings. Her daughter, Elaine, lived overseas, their exchanges limited to short phone calls that often ended with promises of longer conversations that never came. And her youngest, Michael, though living nearby, was immersed in the demands of raising his own family. Margaret's heart ached for the warmth of the relationships she once had, but she understood that time had woven a different tapestry for her children. She told herself not to burden them, even as her loneliness grew. She turned to her garden for solace, tending to her roses and lilies with the same care she had once given her children. Each bloom felt like a small triumph, a reminder that life could still flourish in the quiet corners of existence. One autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Margaret sat on her porch, gazing at the golden hues painting the sky. A letter from Elaine lay on the table beside her. It was a rare, handwritten note that spoke of longing and regret for the distance between them. Elaine had written, "I wish I could be there more often, Mom. Life feels so rushed, and yet I know it's slipping by." The words brought tears to Margaret's eyes, not out of sadness, but from a deep well of understanding. She realized that her children, too, were grappling with the currents of their own lives. The teachings of the Buddha came to her mind. Hatred does not cease by hatred, but by love alone. While there was no hatred in her family, she saw how the absence of presence could create a chasm just as wide. Love, she understood, was not merely about proximity or frequency, but about intention. It was about holding space for one another, even from afar. Determined to nurture the connections she valued most, Margaret began writing letters to her children. These were not emails or hurried texts, but thoughtful, heartfelt letters that carried pieces of her days and reflections on life. She wrote about the sparrows that nested in her garden, the memories she cherished, and the wisdom she had gathered over the years. She did not ask for their time or attention, but offered her love freely, knowing that love given without expectation is its purest form. The responses came slowly but steadily. Richard started calling more often, his tone less hurried, his laughter more genuine. Elaine, during her next visit, brought a scrapbook filled with photos of her travels and moments she wished to share with her mother. Michael began visiting on weekends, bringing his children along to play in the garden Margaret had so lovingly tended. The distance, though still present, began to feel less daunting, bridged by the renewed threads of connection. One evening, as the family gathered around Margaret's dining table for a rare reunion, she looked around and felt a profound sense of gratitude. It wasn't the grand moments that filled her heart, but the small, quiet acts of love. Her grandson's giggle as he reached for another cookie, Richard's hand resting on her shoulder as he shared a story, and Elaine's soft smile as she poured tea. These moments, she realized, were the essence of life, fleeting yet eternal in their impact. In her solitude, Margaret had learned that relationships, like gardens, require patience and care. They need to be watered with understanding, pruned of resentment, and allowed to grow at their own pace. She discovered that while she could not control the paths her children chose, she could ensure that her love remained a guiding light for them, unwavering and unconditional. The Buddha's teachings echoed in her heart. True love is born from understanding. Margaret knew she had found peace, not by holding on, but by letting go, of expectations, of grievances, and of the need to control. In doing so, she had not only healed her own heart, but had also created space for her family to rediscover theirs. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret sat quietly on her porch, watching her family depart. The house, once again, was quiet, but this time the silence felt full, not empty. It carried the weight of love, the echoes of laughter, and the promise of future moments yet to come. In that stillness, Margaret found what she had always sought: connection, not as a possession, but as a gift that flows freely between open hearts. The world has a rhythm of impermanence, a song of constant change that hums beneath all things. For those who have walked through decades of life, this truth becomes both a comfort and a challenge. To embrace impermanence is to let go of the desire to hold on tightly to what cannot remain. Yet, in the act of letting go, there is a liberation that allows the heart to expand and the soul to find peace. For Mr. Edward, the passing years had brought both joy and sorrow. He had once been a builder, crafting homes for others with a precision and care that mirrored his own values. His life was built on strong foundations: his marriage to Clara, his 3 children, and a community that respected his integrity. Yet, as time wore on, those foundations began to shift. Clara passed away suddenly one spring morning, leaving Edward in a house that felt too large for his grief. His children, while loving, had their own lives, their visits becoming shorter and less frequent. Edward found himself surrounded by the quiet echoes of what had been. At first, he resisted the changes, clinging to every relic of his past. Clara's favorite chair remained by the window, untouched. Her knitting basket, still holding half-finished scarves, sat in its usual spot. Edward refused to move anything, as if preserving these objects could keep her presence alive. Yet, the stillness of these spaces began to weigh on him, turning his home into a museum of memories rather than a place for living. One day, while tending to the garden Clara had loved, Edward found himself staring at the empty trellis where her climbing roses once bloomed. The vines had withered without her care, their brittle remains a stark contrast to the vibrant life they once held. In that moment, a thought surfaced, unbidden but clear. Nothing in life remains as it is. Even the strongest roots eventually fade. It wasn't a thought of despair, but of understanding. The garden, much like his life, needed tending, not to preserve what had been, but to make space for what could still grow. Edward began small. He cleared the trellis, planting new roses in Clara's honor. He went through the house room by room, gently parting with the items that no longer served him. Each act of letting go was a mixture of sadness and relief, as if each object released carried with it a fragment of his grief. He kept the things that truly mattered: a photo of Clara on their wedding day, the quilt she had sewn for their first child, a small jar of sea glass from their favorite beach. These became treasures, not burdens, reminders of a love that had shaped him but did not confine him. As Edward embraced this process, he found that his heart became lighter. The spaces he cleared made room for new experiences. He began attending community events, something he hadn't done since Clara's passing. At first it felt strange, as if he was stepping into a world that had moved on without him. But slowly, he discovered joy in these moments of connection: a neighbor's laughter, a child's curious questions, the warmth of shared meals. He wasn't replacing what he had lost, but allowing himself to embrace the present with an open heart. One evening, as he walked home from a gathering, Edward thought about the Buddhist teaching on impermanence. It was a lesson he had read about, but only now truly understood. Clinging to what is fleeting brings suffering, but accepting change allows for peace. He realized that Clara's love had not vanished. It had transformed, woven into his very being. She was there in the roses blooming once again, in the stories he shared with neighbors, in the resilience that carried him through each day. Edward's children noticed the change in him. During one of their visits, his daughter, Emma, remarked, "You seem different, Dad. Lighter somehow." Edward smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I think I've learned to let go," he replied. "Not of your mother or the life we shared, but of the need to hold it so tightly. There's still so much beauty in what's left." As the seasons turned, Edward continued to tend his garden, both the one outside his home and the one within his soul. Each act of care, watering the roses, sharing a cup of tea with a neighbor, writing letters to his grandchildren, became a meditation on the transient yet precious nature of life. He no longer feared change. He welcomed it as a part of the rhythm of existence. In his later years, Edward found a peace he hadn't thought possible. He had learned that letting go is not an act of forgetting, but a way of honoring what was by embracing what is. The world around him continued to change, but within its impermanence, he found something eternal, the quiet strength of a heart that has learned to flow with the river of life. And in that flow, he discovered not just the memory of joy, but the presence of it, here and now. Gratitude is a quiet force, often overlooked in the hurried pace of life, yet it holds the power to transform even the simplest moments into profound blessings. In the stillness of old age, when the distractions of ambition and busyness fall away, the practice of gratitude becomes not just a comfort, but a way of seeing the world anew. For those who embrace it, life's imperfections soften, revealing an underlying beauty that was always there, waiting to be noticed. Mrs. Eleanor had spent her life as a schoolteacher, shaping young minds with patience and kindness. Her retirement years were filled with a different kind of education, one that taught her the art of appreciating life's small wonders. She lived alone in a modest apartment, her days marked by routines that might have seemed unremarkable to others, but were rich with meaning to her. Each morning, she brewed a cup of tea and sat by her window, watching the sunrise paint the sky with hues of pink and gold. "Another gift," she would whisper to herself, her hands cradling the warm mug. Her days were simple, yet they brimmed with an awareness that brought her a quiet joy. She delighted in the rustling leaves outside her window, the laughter of children playing in the park below, and the scent of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. These were not grand moments, but they were enough. Eleanor had learned, through years of reflection, that gratitude was not about having everything, but about seeing the value in what she already had. Her philosophy was tested one winter when she slipped on an icy sidewalk and broke her hip. The injury required surgery and months of rehabilitation, forcing her to rely on the help of others. A humbling experience for someone who had prided herself on her independence. At first, she struggled with frustration and self-pity, wondering why life had chosen this moment to test her resilience. But as the days in the hospital turned into weeks, something shifted in her perspective. Eleanor began to notice the kindness of those around her. The nurse who adjusted her pillows with care, the janitor who always greeted her with a smile, the physical therapist who encouraged her with words of hope. Each act, though small, felt like a thread weaving a tapestry of support. She realized that even in her vulnerability, she was not alone. "Thank you," she began to say, not out of obligation, but with genuine appreciation. The words felt like a balm, soothing both her and those who heard them. As she recovered, Eleanor carried this newfound gratitude into her daily life. She wrote letters to old friends, thanking them for their companionship over the years. She joined a local book club, where she found joy in shared stories and laughter. She even started a gratitude journal, filling its pages each night with reflections on the day's blessings. "A warm cup of soup," she wrote one evening. "The way the sunlight fell on my bookshelf. A phone call from my niece." Each entry was a reminder that happiness wasn't something to chase, but something to uncover in the present. The teachings of the Buddha often spoke of contentment as the greatest wealth, a truth Eleanor came to understand deeply. She began to see her life not as a series of gains and losses, but as a garden filled with seeds of joy waiting to be nurtured. Gratitude became her way of tending this garden, allowing her to face life's challenges with grace and resilience. One autumn afternoon, as she walked through the park with her cane, a young woman approached her, carrying a notebook and a shy smile. "Excuse me," the woman said. "I've seen you here before. You always look so peaceful. May I ask, what's your secret?" Eleanor paused, her lips curving into a gentle smile. "There's no secret," she replied. "Just gratitude. I've learned to notice the little things and hold them close. Life isn't perfect, but it's precious. That's enough for me." The woman nodded, her eyes thoughtful, and they sat together on a bench, sharing stories of their lives. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, offering words of encouragement and wisdom drawn from her years of living. When the woman left, she thanked Eleanor, her voice filled with sincerity. Eleanor watched her go, her heart full, knowing that their brief exchange was yet another thread in the fabric of her gratitude. As the years continued, Eleanor's gratitude deepened, becoming the lens through which she saw the world. Her health ebbed and flowed, her days varied in ease and difficulty, but her spirit remained steady. She understood that gratitude wasn't a denial of life's hardships, but a way of holding them alongside its joys. It was a practice of balance, of finding light even in the shadows. In her final days, surrounded by family and friends, Eleanor spoke with a clarity that left an indelible mark on those who loved her. "Life is not about what you achieve or accumulate," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "It's about how you see. Gratitude changes the way you see everything, and when you see with gratitude, you'll find that even the hardest days have their gifts." When Eleanor passed, her gratitude journal was discovered by her niece, its pages filled with reflections that captured the essence of her life. It was not a record of extraordinary events, but of an extraordinary perspective, one that turned the ordinary into something luminous. Her words became a legacy, a reminder to those she left behind that gratitude is the simplest yet most profound way to honor the gift of life. And so, Eleanor's story lives on, not in grand monuments or accolades, but in the hearts of those who carry her wisdom forward. It is a story of seeing, of noticing, of giving thanks for what is, and in doing so, discovering that what is enough.